be, you can tell they're sucking their stomach in, so it's somewhat artificial. They're smiling and their back is straight. And I've often thought we should do that with Kriya Yoga, because I think you should see some of these people before they arrived on the path of Kriya Yoga. My own before Kriya Yoga photo, the very last photo that was ever taken of me before I started on the path of Kriya, was what is called in America is called the mug shot. The mug shot is the photo that the police take after they've arrested you and put you into jail. I hesitate to even say this with the former head of the CBI in our audience here, but that was my before Kriya Yoga photo. And so the changes that you see, or the people that you see practicing Kriya Yoga for many years, the changes are amazing. They happen quickly for those who dedicate themselves to it. After a few years, again, you will not recognize yourself. I'll tell the story of my wife. She passed away, left the body about 6 years ago. And 6 years ago, she had a condition where it was obvious that the sands of her karma were up for this lifetime. The doctors gave her 3 weeks to live, and she understood that I think the God and the Guru came to her and told her, your time is up here, my child, it's time for you to go home. And much of her life, she had a great fear of death and illness. But in the last year of her life, I believe through the practice of Kriya Yoga, through meditation, through the expansion of the little self into the infinite self, she finally understood that there's no such thing as death. Everything is life. When we leave the body, as we all must when the time comes, she understood that this is a time of being reborn into something much greater. And there was such an extreme sense of joy, laughter, humor, calmness, peace, inner freedom during those last weeks of her life that could only be attributed to the power of meditation and Kriya Yoga. Mahavatar Babaji, when he gave this technique to Lahiri Mahashaya, he told Lahiri Mahashaya, when you give Kriya Yoga to your disciples, quote this passage from the Bhagavad Gita to all of them. He said, tell them that even a little practice of this inward religion can free you from dire fears and colossal sufferings. And life tests us. I don't think anyone has an easy life. And the practice of meditation, Kriya Yoga, frees us from all kinds of fears, all kinds of problems, all kinds of anxieties. And it really transforms the individual. And again, I would just like to encourage people, watch this beautiful film at 5:30, Finding Happiness, because you will see many, many different examples of Kriya Yogis and how you apply these practices in every aspect of life, as a parent, as a husband, as a wife, as a teacher. Now, health, meditation, wellness, all these things have two components. One is science, the other is the art. Yoganandaji often talked about his practices of meditation. He said they are art and science. And Swami Kriyanandaji often used an analogy. He said that you can teach the techniques of art at an art college to thousands and thousands of students, but you are lucky if even one of them becomes a great artist, a great painter. Because that one individual who becomes a great painter, it's about much more than just technique. It's about the inner awareness, the intuition, the inner understanding that you apply to the techniques. Yoganandaji said about his Kriya Yoga technique, he said, Kriya Yoga plus devotion works like mathematics. It cannot fail. And really behind that sentence was something much broader. This weekend, just yesterday, I was in Delhi and we had a big spiritual fair there in New Delhi. And one of the topics that I spoke about, along with one of our other acharyas, was Kriya Yoga, self-effort versus divine grace. And this sort of is a war between different religions, different spiritual practices. One side says everything depends on divine grace. I go to the temple, I make some offerings, God will take care of me and bless me. The other side says we must do everything on our own. If I do enough yoga, if I do enough diet, if I do enough things to perfect myself, I will become divine and godlike entirely through my own efforts. And you see this in many different religions and spiritual traditions. What Yoganandaji brought was an extremely unusual combination of those two approaches, which is that we practice meditation, we practice Kriya Yoga, we develop willpower, energy, but at the same time, we attune ourselves to divine grace, to divine bliss, to all the qualities of the divine, because in the end, we cannot act and speak and even breathe without the power of God, the power of Spirit flowing through us, enlivening us. And true success in the end is this beautiful combination, even marriage in a way, of spirit and nature, of our own efforts, our own willpower, our own concentration, our own practices, of all these techniques that we're learning here this weekend at this fair, but combined with attunement to the divine. And this is really Kriya Yoga meditation. It's not just a breathing exercise. It's not just a technique that is done mechanically. It's done, as Swami Kriyanandaji said about the Kriya technique. He said every Kriya should be an act of devotional self-offering. And really, Kriya, the word Kriya is based on the same root as the word karma, which simply means action. He was also saying that every action, every act that we perform in life should be an act of devotional offering to God, however we see God. And in that approach to life, we find that the ego starts to expand, not to become more egotistical, but it dissolves into spirit, into divine joy. Yoganandaji said about God, he said, people think of God in many, many different ways. His definition was the same as Adi Shankara. God is Sat Chitanandam, ever existing, ever conscious, ever new, divine bliss. And you'll find that Kriya Yogis, this is why Swami Kriyanandaji, I think, titled and gave the name of Ananda Village to his first ashram and spiritual community, and Ananda Sangha, because you'll find that there really is the goal of life is happiness, finding happiness, as the movie later this afternoon is titled, but ultimately finding divine joy. And that comes through a life of meditation, technique, science, but also art. You will see that successful people in this world, really successful people, I'm not talking about someone who becomes a billionaire, but someone who has a good life of relative prosperity, but also and especially kindness, compassion, giving to others, happiness and joy, that in some way they've developed this quality of self-expansion versus self-involvement. And in that process of self-expansion of the ego, of offering our actions to God in seva, in service to others, that self-involvement becomes self-expansion. And in self-expansion, you will see that those who give to others, those who serve others, those who sacrifice their lives for others, it's very interesting that they become the wealthiest people in the world. They have happiness, they have fulfillment, and this is the art of life in a way. It's interesting, Yoganandaji, about 70 years ago, he gave a talk that he titled The Art of Living. And what he described as that was this whole lifestyle of meditation, seva, even simple basic things he taught as right diet, regular daily exercise, combined with the art that we're talking about, is this whole lifestyle that can make one a fulfilled, happy, joyful, compassionate, kind, all the qualities that we ascribe to saints and masters. Yoganandaji once said something very interesting. He said, I can take a few young men of the coarsest type, He was talking about any young man that you might see, a criminal type even. And he said, I can teach them Kriya Yoga, and if they practice it in the way that I teach it to them, they can become saints within a few years. If not saints, they can become saintly. He had one disciple who was very devoted to the Guru, Yoganandaji. This disciple had a very bad habit, an extremely bad habit. He was an alcoholic. He drank whiskey all the time. And you might think, well, how can someone who's drunk and drinking whiskey all the time, how can he become a Kriya Yogi and practice meditation, and what benefit would it have? Well, it was a very interesting story. He would literally practice Kriya Yoga with his Kriya beads in one hand, counting the number of Kriyas. In his other hand, he would have a bottle of whiskey. He would drink the whiskey with one hand, he would practice Kriya with the other. One day, as he was practicing, he finally realized that Kriya Yoga was starting to give him an inner joy, an inner fulfillment that was so much greater than this bad habit of alcohol, that he literally took that bottle of whiskey, he threw it down on the ground and it shattered, and he said, I'm done with this. And he was. Now think of your own bad habits. Think of your own worst habits, whether it's an addiction, whether it's the habit to be angry, whether it's the habit to be unkind, unhappy, sad, or depressed. These are all habits of the mind, really, in a way. You'll find that perhaps the worst habits of all are those mental habits that cause us to respond to the same situation over and over again with unhappiness or irritation or anger. You will find that Kriya Yoga has the power to change you from the inside out. And it's partly, as I said, through the techniques of Kriya, giving us pranayama, control of our life force, but it also is the power of divine grace, because when we attune ourselves to God, to the Divine Mother, to the bliss of the universe, however you want to express or relate to the divine, you will find that that power transforms us. And so this is the beautiful, it's almost the dance between the devotee and God. And Kriya Yoga could be the dance floor in a way where we are practicing these things. And so if you are not meditating, experiment with yourself. Yoganandaji loved the spirit that people have of self-experimentation. And I would just challenge you. There was a recent experiment, a scientific study on meditation, and it was studying the effects of meditation on the brain. And this study discovered that 12 minutes of meditation every day for only 8 weeks makes observable changes in the brain itself. All of them good changes. It brings more energy, more blood, more life force to the frontal lobes, where people have compassion, kindness, where the tools of perception are there. Interestingly, the study also found that after just those 12 weeks of meditation, or 8 weeks of meditation, people's tools of perception increased. They became more aware, they became more alert, they become more understanding of other people's realities. This study was done on people even who were older. And you think that people who are older, their tools of perception start weakening over time. But in fact, meditation changes the brain. And this is the science of meditation. And again, when you combine science and art, this is why you see the before and after photographs of Kriya Yogis making such extraordinary changes in them. So before I go on anymore, I would like to see if people have any questions in the audience about Kriya Yoga, about meditation, about Ananda Sangha, about any of these things that we've been talking about today. So you can raise your hand. We can maybe perhaps bring a microphone around to you, or someone can relay the question to us up front. No? Is this a question coming up here? There's one over there. Question? Why don't you come up here and I'll hand you the microphone.